My name is Frank White and welcome to another episode of Photography Tips and Reviews. In this episode, I am going to talk about the exposure triangle. Yep, that's right. So this video is particularly geared towards beginners who are trying to get off the auto mode and into the manual mode of shooting with your camera, specifically DSLRs. Now, what I want to do is explain the relationship of the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO to each other and talk about what those three settings really are. I am going to start with the aperture. Okay, but before I actually start, I want to kind of give an overview of those three. The exposure triangle consists of those three settings: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. Now, if you think about a triangle, then at the tip of each triangle, you got that setting. And in order to maintain your triangle, means that if you move one, then you got to adjust at least one other. Now, that's what your camera tend to do for you, but by you being able to control those settings yourself, you will be able to achieve certain artistic, visually artistic elements in your camera or in your images. For example, if you can figure out how to make your shutter speed long, if you can figure out how to make your shutter speed shoot at 1 second versus 1/1000th of a second, and you're shooting waterfalls, then you can create this creamy effect. Here's a picture of a waterfall being captured at 1/100th of a second, and here's one being captured at I think this is 1/3 of a second. So you can see the different effect. So you can see how artistically different these two captures look. With respect to aperture, if you can figure out how to open up your aperture, and you got a fairly long lens, let's say a 100mm lens, and if you can figure out how to open that aperture up to say f2.8, then you can create this nice creamy background versus having just about everything in focus, which is the setting that your camera tend to automatically want to make. It tend to want to put as much in the focus as it can. And with respect to ISO, changing that setting has the effect of introducing a grainy look or not having a grainy look. So there are not that many scenarios where you want to actually create a grainy look unless you want to do a vintage or an aged looking photo. Otherwise, with respect to the ISO, you tend to want to adjust that so that you can keep it at the lowest while getting the best exposure with your aperture and your shutter speed. Now, sometimes it's not practical. With most cameras, the lowest is ISO 100, but sometimes it's just not practical to shoot at ISO 100. So in which case, you may find that you might need to shoot at ISO 6400 to get a good exposure that's usually, particularly in low light. So without any further ado, let's get started. So the aperture is how much light you're going to let in through your lens at any given point. So I've got some plumbing devices here that you've seen me hold in my hand, and I'm actually going to use this to demonstrate ISO. Now ISO is one of those funny things because the lower the number is, the wider open that iris is on that lens or that aperture. So for, let's say for a lens that go from f2.8 to f22, then your 2.8 may look like this. And as you can see, this lets in a lot of light, whereas your f22 may be this small or even smaller. f22 small restricts how much light comes in, and f2.8 big opens up your aperture to let a lot of light come in. Now let's also look at what happens with the shutter speed. So what the shutter do is measure how long you're going to let light come in. Not how much light comes in through that opening, but how long you're going to allow that light to come in. So I got my hose pipe here, and the head blew off of it, so I'm actually having to bend it to make this video. But let's say that you're shooting something at 1/1000th of a second. Well, it may look like this. Okay, 1/1000th of a second. Let's say you're shooting something at 1/100th of a second, and light may come in like that. So it came in longer, for a longer period of time than it did at 1/1000th of a second. Let's say you're shooting something at 1 second, then light may look like this. Of course, it wouldn't trail off like this, but you get the idea. Okay, so that was my demonstration of shutter speed. How long you allow that shutter to be open to let the light come in. Now, how are we going to explain the ISO? I got an idea. So now ISO is not that difficult. What the ISO does is it measures how sensitive your sensor is to the light that's being gathered by the lens. So remember, you got light coming in either through some opening, either a small opening or a big opening, or some combination thereof, and you got the amount of time that you're letting that light in. Well, when that light hits that sensor, then that sensor determines how sensitive the camera is going to be to that light. Okay, so for the demonstration, then let's say my hand is the light and hit, and boom. Now this is ISO 100. It's not that, the sensor is not that sensitive to the light. But if let me just turn this guy on. There we go. So this is, now this is the sensor, and let's say I want to crank this guy up to 6400, which might look like this. Turn it down, and my hand again is the light, and ISO 6400. So I'm measuring how sensitive the light is to that sensor. But let's say it's really, really dark, or sort of dark. It's enough dark to make a picture, but I need to bump that ISO to say let's say 12,800, and it may look like this. So if this is light, then I just made that picture. So, you know, right now the idea is that light is really sensitive to the camera or to the sensor. And of course, all the way up would be 25, 12,800, 25,600, and so forth and so on. So you get the idea of how ISO works with the light and the inside the camera system. So I hope this video has been really helpful at explaining what the aperture is, what the ISO is, and what the shutter speed is, and how they kind of relate to each other. It's not as mysterious as it looks once you get the hang of it. So the more you practice in manual mode, then the more intuitive finding your settings would be. So the art to making good pictures is a lot of practice. So if you haven't been out there practicing, then I suggest that you get out there and make some pictures. Even if it doesn't feel like you are getting into keepers, at least you're learning. If you like this information, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I use that as my barometer to determine how well I'm presenting you with this information. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that subscription button. That way you will become part of this community of photographers. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. If you're going to shoot anybody today, shoot them with a Canon or a camera of your choice. And remember, guys, keep shooting no matter what.